Hi guys, in this video we're going to be deploying a full stack Angular with ASP.NET Core and SQL Server application to Azure. The example application that we'll be deploying supports user registration and login functionality. We'll be starting from scratch, so setting up a new server in Azure and an Azure SQL database, and then deploying the application to it and testing it. The application front end and back end, we won't be going into the details of the code of these applications, but they are covered in detail in these two separate tutorials linked here. The steps that we'll be going through in this video that I'm going through right now in this tutorial is linked to in the video description, so you can follow along. So let's get started here. The tutorial contents. So the steps that we'll be going through today are creating a new Windows Server on Azure, so a new virtual machine. Then we'll connect to the server via RDP, remote desktop. Then we'll configure the server with IIS, the Windows web server. Then create an Azure SQL database using the Azure SQL database service. Then we'll build and deploy the .NET Core backend API to the server. We'll do the same for the front-end app, then configure IIS to serve the API and the front-end from the same site, both on port 80, and then we'll test with a browser. At the moment I'm working on a Windows 10 virtual machine that I've just spun up in Azure as well actually. So you can see working from a blank machine. The only thing I've done on this machine is install Chrome, so you can see how everything is set up from scratch. Okay, let's get started. The first step is to log into the Azure portal to create the Windows virtual machine. So if you don't have an Azure account yet, you can create a free one at this link. I already have one, so I'll go over here and log in. I already signed in, so this is the Azure portal. You can see the desktop that I'm actually working on here and the resources that I've created. So once you've signed in, go to virtual machines and then create a new virtual machine. So virtual machines, click on add resource. So my subscription, my free trial's already expired, so I'm under pay as you go. You should have a free trial here if you've just signed up to a new account. We'll create a new resource group. This can be anything you like. I'll just call it my resource group. And this resource group will be used to contain this server and anything else you want associated with it. And it's the resource groups are handy for grouping things together that you want to be able to destroy all in one go later on. For the virtual machine name, I'll just call it my server. The region can be anything you like. I'll put it in US East 1. For the image, the operating system, we use Windows Server 2019. For the size, I'll change the size to the minimum required just to make it cheaper. So I think at least 2 gig of RAM for Windows Server is probably the best thing to go. So the B1 MS size. That's what I have here as well. Alright, and we'll set a username for the server and a password. For the inbound ports, RDP is allowed by default, which is we want that to be able to connect to the server to configure it. We also want to allow HTTP access, which is what we'll be using to test and access the website once it's up and running. Okay, under Management next, switch off boot diagnostics, just because that creates other resources which we don't need here. And then go over to Review and Create. And click Create. Okay, the deployment is underway. You can see what's coming up next. Alright, once that's ready, we can connect via RDP. If you're on Windows, as I am here, the RDP client is installed by default. If you're running on Mac, then I've got a link here to the Windows RDP client that you can install for Mac. Okay, our server is now ready. Don't worry if it takes a bit longer for you. I've sped it up in the video, so you don't have to sit through a few minutes of waiting. To the next thing, if we're to go to the server details, just click the Go to Resource button here. And let me just double check my instructions here. And that's right. So to connect, we want to, from the server overview page, click the connect icon. We want the RDP selected, download the RDP file. It's downloaded there. Click open. We trust this server, so you can tick that box so it doesn't give you that alert again. Click connect. Enter your username and password that you set up for the server in the last step. And optionally say remember me again. You trust the certificate. That's because it's a self-signed certificate. Just click yes to connect to the server. Okay, while that's connecting, we can see what the next steps are. So next we will be setting up our web server with IIS. So by default, when the server boots up, it'll open up with the server manager displaying. Okay. So we want to click Add Roles Features. Add roles and features. Once it's ready. Okay, it's finished loading. Add roles and features. Click Next. Role-based feature installation. Selecting our server. We want the web server feature selected. We want to include these features. Then click Next. Click Next again. Next. Next and install. And right now that is installing IIS. Oh, installation has succeeded. Let's look at the next step. So next what we want to do is a couple of things, add-ons to IIS. We want to install the .NET Core hosting bundle. Then we want to restart IIS to complete the installation of the .NET Core hosting bundle. And then we want to install a IIS URL rewrite, an IIS add-on, a rewriting module for allowing URL rewriting in IIS. So we want to download those on our desktop and transfer them over to the server. So I'll click this link here, and you can see that it's downloaded. I'll go to that folder, copy from the folder and go over to the server, remote desktop, and just go to the downloads folder and paste that there. I will quickly just change the folder options to allow to stop hiding file extensions. I prefer to be able to see the file types, and we'll run that installer. Once the .NET Core hosting bundle is installed, go back to the instructions and copy this command, which will restart IIS. Then go back to the server, or open up a command window and paste that there. See, it's stopping and then starting. And then we'll go to the next step, which is to download the URL rewrite module. So to download the extension on the desktop, click here. The reason I'm downloading it on the desktop is because of the restrictions around that are on the server browser, which prevent file downloading. And rather than disabling those restrictions, I'd prefer to just download them on the desktop and transfer them over. So let's copy that and go over to remote desktop and paste and install. Clicking install and accept and finish. You can exit the web platform installer. Then let's see what's next. Creating our Azure SQL database. So this will be our database in the cloud that we'll connect to from our application. So within the Azure portal again, we'll go to the SQL databases service. So back on our desktop again, on the Azure portal, we can get to the SQL databases section by going to this search box and entering SQL. Select SQL databases. I'll close these tabs because we don't need them anymore. Then we want to click Add to create a new create a new SQL database. We'll put the database in the same resource group as our server. So that was my resource group. The database name can be any name. We'll call it MySQL DB. For the server name, it needs to be a globally unique server name, because it will be used as the URL to get to the server, and it'll be in this format. So server name dot database dot windows dot net. So I'll call it, so I'll create new server, enter the server name, call it J. Watmore SQL. Should be unique. And next we'll enter the admin username, password, and location. For an admin login, I'll select Jason. For password, rather than coming up with something, I'll just use a password generator. That should do, and that should satisfy, hopefully, password requirements of Azure. And for location, I'll put it in the same region as the server, US East. OK. And I'll just make a note of the password that we just generated there, so we can use it later. So that's the server that will be created. Next steps. Location, compute and storage. So the compute and storage is what they calculate charging based on. This is just a test application, so we only need basic. So we'll just set it to basic, which is the cheapest option from what I know. So we'll click apply there. So basic storage. Networking is next. Okay, we want to select a public endpoint and allow Azure services. And that will be to allow our server to connect to the Azure SQL Server. So our web application is able to connect to the database. Then we go to review and create and click create. So we can leave everything default in these other two. Go to review and create and click create. Deployment's in progress, underway. Let's check what's next. Okay, while that database is being deployed, we can move on to the next step and build and deploy our ASP.NET Core backend API to the server. So first, we will be cloning the API project and building it on the desktop machine, and then we'll be copying those publishable files to the server. So first, we want to clone the repository. This is a new desktop, so we don't have Git installed yet. So the first thing to do is install Git. I'm going to download it for Windows and then install. All the default options are fine. Don't need the release notes. Okay, I have Git installed now. So I can git clone the API project using this command. So I'll copy that and open a command prompt. I'll use the downloads folder just to keep everything simple and paste in the command. And if we go into downloads folder here, you can see that we have the API project cloned. Next step is to update the database connection string to point to our new Azure SQL database. So in the Azure portal overview page, let's go back to Azure. So our database deployment is complete, so we can go to the overview page for the database. And if we check show database connection strings to see the database connection string, and we can copy that there. Then I'll open up the .NET Core app settings file, which is app settings. So within the root folder of the project, I'll just use Notepad to keep things simple. You'll likely have an IDE like VS Code or something like that. And put that in there. Replace the value of the connection string with the one you just copied. That's done. Inside, let's replace the password with the one we just created. So this is the password that we generated for our database. We can see the server URL is the one that we created for the server, and there's the password. So replace that. We'll also update the JWT signing token signing secret. So that's what's used to generate JWT tokens, and you should make that your own unique string. It can be any string, as it says here, rather than typing a bunch of random characters. Good easy way is to generate a couple of GUIDs and just paste them in there. And that works pretty well for generating something random. Okay, save that file. Next, we want to build our API with the .NET Publish configuration release to build it in production mode or release mode. We don't have the .NET Core SDK installed yet, so I'll install that quickly by downloading it here. So we want to download the full SDK for .NET Core, so that's this one here. I'll open up a new command window once that's installed, so it picks it up. Alright, .NET Core SDK is installed. Open a new command window and copy that command. Navigate into the project root folder, paste the command, and that should build our application in release mode. Okay, that's done, and it's put the files in the published directory. Okay, finally for the API is to simply copy the files out of that published directory into a new directory on the server that we'll call backend for the API. So going over to the folder in bin release .NET Core 3.1 publish. So we want to copy all of those files, and on the server I'll create a new folder. I like keeping my projects in a root projects folder in the C drive, and we'll call it backend for the backend API, and paste those files there. Okay, so the API files are now deployed. They aren't running yet. They won't be until we configure IIS, which we'll do once we've finished deploying the front end, which we'll do now. So next we'll clone the Angular files to our desktop, which we'll do before building the front end on the desktop and then copying over the built front end files to the server. So into the downloads folder again, we'll clone the Angular project. Next, we want to install all of the Node package dependencies. Again, we don't have Node installed, so I'll install that quickly. Once Node is installed, open another new command window. So it picks up the new application. Navigate into the Angular project folder, run npm I to install the package dependencies. Okay, those packages are installed. Next, we want to update our app to use a real backend API. So by default, the front-end application can run standalone with a fake backend, so it doesn't need an API for testing. We'll be running it with a real backend API here. So we'll make these updates to these files so it uses our real backend API. So open up the source app module ts file in a text editor in Notepad. So going to source app module, and we'll choose another app. For some reason it thinks it's a movie file, and we'll open with Notepad. What we want to remove is the code related to the backend, fake backend. So there's a couple of lines at the top there, and in the providers section. So remove the fake backend provider and save. Also in the webpack config is the URL to the API. By default, it's configured to run on a local machine with an API running on localhost port 4000, but we'll be configuring the API to run on the same URL as the front end, but with the same domain, but on the /API path. So we'll be setting the API URL to just the /API path. So open up the webpack config.js file. It's in the root folder of the project. So edit. I think it's down the bottom. And the API URL change from localhost 4000 excuse me, to /API and save. Next, we will build the app with npm run build. So npm run build will compile our application. Okay, once that's done, we want to copy over the files from the dist directory, which is where the built files went, and we'll create a new folder called frontend on the server to put them into. So within our Angular folder, we see there's a dist folder. We can copy the files out of there, go over to the server, and we'll create a new folder called frontend and paste them in there. Alright, frontend and files are now deployed. Next we'll configure IIS to serve the frontend and the API. As I touched on before, they'll both be served by the same site in IIS. So they'll both, with them being two separate projects, we'll have one site that serves the main site will be serving the front end, and we'll be creating a child application within that site that serves the API. That'll make more sense as we go through it. So on the server, we'll open IIS. First, we'll delete the default website and app pool in there, and then we'll set up our new site. So let's get into that there. So on the server, I'll close up the other things we don't need, and let's go to IIS. So under sites, can remove the default site, so we don't need it, and the default app pool. Then under sites, click add website, and what name did I suggest for it here? My app. Very creative. Okay, let's just call it my app, and we'll set it to the front end. Folder path. Leave the host name blank, and we'll be able to access it via any host name that hits this server, either localhost on the server or hitting it via the IP address that we'll be testing it via from our desktop. Click OK. Next. Okay, next we'll add the child application for the API. So right click on the site, click Add Application, alias is API, which is also the path that will be used to access this application. And point that to the backend folder. And click OK. Okay, the next step in the application pools, because this is a .NET Core application, we don't need the .NET CLR, the full CLR, to be configured. So within basic settings, for CLR version, you can select no managed code and click OK. Alright, next we'll create a web config file inside of our Angular frontend folder, and we'll add this configuration to that file. Now what this does is sets the MIME type of JavaScript files to UTF-8, and what that does is it prevents a regular expression error, because there are some UTF-8 Unicode characters within the Angular JavaScript files, which by default IIS doesn't handle properly, so you need to set it to UTF-8 for them to be handled correctly. And this rewrite configuration allows us to refresh our Angular app when it's on a child path within the Angular app without it getting a 404 error, which can occur with single page applications. So going back to the server, so I've copied that configuration code from the post within the front-end folder, create a new file, called web.config, and then open with Notepad and paste in our configuration. Save, close. And I think that is the final step. Alright, so next we'll enter the public IP address of our Azure server to test our website. So the way we get the public IP is on the Azure portal, go to our server virtual machine, and the public IP address is on the overview page here. Copy it to the clipboard, I'll open new tab and paste it in there, and there we go, there's our application. I'll open a console so we can see it hitting the API. So if I register a new user, register, okay, we can see registration successful. Let's hit the register API users register URL. If I log in, let me type that correctly. Alright, that's all working. Okay, that's how you deploy a Angular with .NET Core and SQL Server application to Azure. One final step, just as a little add-on, I'll show you how you can verify within our SQL databases section. We can see our user that we've just registered that actually got created. So we can go to the query editor within our SQL database, copy our password for the database, And okay, we can see our users table there. And if we select all of our rows, there's our user that I've just registered and the hashed password. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to my channel below. Alright, thanks for watching. Cheers.